All right, what's up, jabronis? Nick just did a video a couple weeks ago about pens, so we thought we'd talk about the other part, pencils. So, I got tons of pencils here. I only use a couple of these, but I do like kind of experimenting with them. There's a million different YouTube videos out there and examples and books and things that talk about kind of like pencil weight and what they do. So I'm not going to get too far into that because it's already been pretty well documented. But I wanted to talk more about like how the way you draw with a pencil can kind of influence how you draw with ink afterward, if that's your intention. We've talked about a lot of comics on here that are only drawn in pencil. We've talked about comics that are only drawn with ink, not sketched, not planned, spontaneous, whatever. So just to be clear, as always, there's no right way to do this. There's no wrong way to do this. And again, we're just going to kind of show some different ways you can do things. But really the best way is, experiment on your own. Go get some art supplies, go borrow some stuff from your office supply closet, and just experiment, see what you like. So a lot of these pencils are things I've accumulated over the years of kind of experimenting with different things, and I think like a lot of artists, I've kind of landed on the ones that I like, and I mostly stick to those, but it kind of depends on what I'm trying to draw. So I find that if I want to draw something that's like kind of loose, kind of action-packed, I might do something that is a little less precise. And if I'm drawing something that I think needs to really be nailed down, I'm going to use one pencil. So it's also okay to mix up what you're doing in the midst of whatever you're drawing. You might start with one type of pencil, and then for another scene, use another type of pencil. Just like anything else, you pick the right tool for the job and whatever you're trying to get done here. So on this side over here, we have colored pencils. This is what they call a non-photo blue pencil, which is not really necessary anymore, but back in the day when people used to put their original artwork through a copy machine, they would use a non-photo blue pencil, which would not read on the copy machine scanner, or if they're making a photostat or something. The non-photo blue, you could leave on the page without erasing. So you would sketch that on the page, you would ink over top of it, and then when you scanned it, you wouldn't see the blue anymore. Nobody does that anymore. Everyone just kind of scans it in, and then in Photoshop or in whatever you're using, once again, fuck Adobe. I use Affinity products, which are basically the same thing for way cheaper. And you can just remove the blue layer. So one way to, and I'm gonna demonstrate these in a little bit, so I just want to kind of introduce them all. But this one, you can sort of sketch things out in the blue layer, ink over top of it, and you don't have to erase anything, which is partly why I like to use the blue lead, because I hate erasing. Number one, it's annoying. Number two, it gets eraser shavings all over the place. And number three, if something is like not quite dry, or maybe the ink you're using is not quite fast enough to the paper, it can smudge stuff, and that sucks. So I don't think it really matters what type of blue you're using. This is technically a non-photo blue pencil. This is just a blue colored pencil, which I found also works. You can see there are two different kinds of blue. So if you can't find non-photo blue pencils, I wouldn't worry too much about that. You can probably just use a blue colored pencil. It's probably fine. And then I know some artists, and I think Nick has been experimenting with this recently, actually use two different kinds of pencils on the same drawing. So you might sketch out some loose shapes, maybe with the blue pencil, and then you might go back in over top with some details on the red pencil, or vice versa. I know I've seen some Dustin Harbin drawings that use this technique, where you kind of loosely sketch something out in one color and then refine it down with the other color. So those are nice. This is the pencil that I use for that same purpose. I use a blue lead inside this blue pencil. I use a blue mechanical pencil, so I remember which one is which I now know is different from this one, just from use. This one is for darker lead. So we'll skip over to these ones. These are obviously mechanical pencils. These are replaceable leads, which you can add any kind of leads you want to. These are the classic ones where you buy the lead separately in small little sticks, and you load them through the eraser, pretty self-explanatory. This one I'm kind of just starting to use, and I think what I want to do is try to track down some blue lead for this one. Let me see if I can get real close up here. These leads are much thicker, they're not so tiny and thin as the mechanical pencils. These are usually, I think previously used more for architectural drawing and drafting, and when you click it, you can kind of pull the whole lead stick out. And then instead of just being a very, very tiny thread, you sharpen them with a separate kind of sharpener. This one that I got came with this tiny little sharpener, which is kind of nice. It fits in a very satisfying way, fits right into that little slot right here. You twist it, keeps those little shavings in there, and you get a nice point on it. These also come in different widths, different kinds of weights, and takes a little getting used to, I guess, because it's basically like using a big pencil but with a replaceable lead. But I kind of like these. Sometimes these sharpeners are like, you crank them and they sharpen from there. And then these ones, I guess I'll switch these over here. These are just regular ass pencils. This is a classic number 2 that you would use in elementary school. This is a black wing, which I guess is now like a trendy kind of hipster pencil. But I do think it's actually pretty nice writing, pretty nice lead. The nice thing about these pencils is that I've learned that there's a lot of quality control involved in pencils, and if you ever get a pencil that sharpens weird, like it sharpens kind of diagonally when you put it in here, that's because their pencil factory is not very good, and they put the lead into the wood kind of at an angle this way, and so it's never going to sharpen well. If you get a pencil that sharpens like on a diagonal up here, throw it in the garbage and just get another one. But that never happens with kind of these small batch like specialty pencils. These come in some different weights and different widths now too, but I don't know, I think they're kind of overpriced if you ask me. And these are just kind of typical drafting drawing pencils. If you don't know, I'm not going to talk about this very long, so if you do know this, bear with me. But in the middle there's kind of HB. H I think stands for hard and B stands for bold. I'll have to look that up, I'll put it on the bottom. But the higher the number of H, the harder the lead is going to be and the lighter line it's going to make. And the higher the number B, the softer the lead is and the darker mark it's going to make. So again, worth experimenting with these. They go all the way, I think, to 9 or 10, I think. They're always kind of changing a little bit. Obviously, the softer the lead, the smudgier it will be, so it'll make a darker mark, but your hand is gonna smudge it around on the page. What else we got here? Sharpeners. This does not make a difference to me at all. I've never found one sharpener I thought was better than another. Although this one I think is a little bit cool because it sharpens kind of a wide tip on one side, and then you sort of refine it over here. So it creates sort of a long sharpen on this side, and then it gives you a point on this side. So it's not just one width, which is kind of nice, not expensive. And then depending on what you're using, you're gonna want some kind of eraser situation. I found that a kneaded eraser is pretty useless for any kind of H-based pencil that has a hard lead that makes a fine line, because the lead is harder and it just doesn't pick it up. But any kind of soft lead, like a B, this will scoop it up really nicely. You can tell I haven't used this very often. I use mostly hard lead. And then these white erasers are just pretty much what I use. You can see that it has some of the blue line stuff on there. All right, so the main thing I wanted to talk about here is I feel like the way that the type of pencil that you use kind of has an impact on the way your inking is going to look. So my thinking is that if you are drawing with a soft lead, which is this one's pretty soft, it makes kind of a lighter sort of gliding feeling on the paper. That's sort of a softer lead. And then if you're using something harder, like let's say let's do this 4H right here. Okay, there we go. If you're using something harder, that's going to give you a much lighter line, right? You can probably barely even see that on the camera. That's a way lighter line. So if you're using a lighter line, you can't really just press down hard because you're going to be pressing into the paper. You're going to be making a little groove into the paper, which is going to mess up your inking, because now your pen tip is going to hit that groove and it's going to skip, right? It's gonna mess up your inking line. So you have to keep the lighter pencil pretty light. Now, Let me erase these here. The difference here being that if you're drawing lightly, you have to kind of build up the line, right? If you're making a dark mark with this, like let's say we're trying to draw like a person, I might sketch in this, like a head here, and then sketch in like a kind of a chest shape here. This is kind of how I always start out certain characters and sort of build up from here. So if I'm drawing, let's say like a, I don't know, some kind of muscle character, you can tell that as soon as we put this down, the line's going to be kind of dark, right? So you can only put down so many lines before it starts to get really dark, and to me it starts to get really hard to see. So I'm just going to sketch this in here. All right, so once we start getting into all those details, it becomes a little harder to see when you start inking. Now the cool thing about the lighter pencil for me is you have to kind of build up that line. So when you first start, you get these really loose, really light little shapes. You're barely even able to see that on the camera. So in terms of planning something, I like that for me, I can start with these lighter lines and then build up that line as I'm going. All right, so let's say I have this here. Oops, I'm not even doing this the same way. There we go. So let's say we've got these body shapes here, and there we go. And that way, if I mess this up or if I want to change it or something, I can do that, A, without any trouble, and B, I haven't like committed to the drawing too much, right? So I've got a nice light shape here though. And then either with the same pencil, you can go back in there and start building up that line, making it a little darker. And see, even now, it's still not quite as dark as that one, which I just had to kind of put down there. Now I'm kind of building up that line, right? I'm going back in there, and I'm sort of refining that line a little bit. Now this is basically, I think, about the line, the weight of pencil that I like to use for my blue inking. I mean, my blue penciling whenever I use blue stuff for drawing comics. But I like the blue line because it's just so different from the black ink. The blue pencil really makes that ink sort of stand out. Just makes it a little more clear what I'm doing. Because the biggest issue I have is that when I'm inking, I want to really be able to see the ink line of what it's going to look like when it's all done. And I find that if the pencils are too dark, for me, I have a hard time seeing what I'm doing. But that's also because my penciling is like pretty precise. Okay, so see how we're building up that line. So if you go over that same space over and over again with that pencil, you're building up the line. You're not just kind of committing to it. Now again, there's no wrong way to do this. There's no right way to do this. This is just sort of my preferred way of working, is if I move kind of slowly and build it up instead of just dropping that line right in there, I find that I have a little bit easier time inking it. But if I am drawing something that has like a little more action to it, I usually go with a little bit of a softer lead, because I don't want to be precise about it. I want to keep the looseness in the inking process, so I want to keep the drawing loose, because when you're drawing with a softer lead, the drawing kind of has to be a little looser, because otherwise it's going to be really dark and you're going to have no idea what it's going to look like, right? It just kind of, to me, it just sort of turns like into a mess after a little while. Like even this, I don't feel compelled to ink this at all, because I feel like it's already sort of like soupy and too dark. Whereas for something like this, I've sort of built that line up a little bit. And then to take this a step further, whenever I do my pencils, I always use the blue lead in this kind of pencil. Now, this lead is, in total transparency, super annoying to draw with because it breaks really, really easily. So I find that kind of like a nice little challenge to keep the drawing nice and light, because otherwise it just snaps constantly and it's really annoying. So if I'm getting into like an action scene or something that is really jam-packed and full of action, I have to switch to another lead. Otherwise I'm just like snap, 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 and this lead breaks all the time. So that's why I kind of want to start switching to this. They do make these drafting leads in blue, and I think I'll order some maybe. See how that goes. Maybe I'll do a follow up to this episode if anyone's interested. But see, it keeps it nice and light. Again, this is like the building up the line approach, because that blue pencil is really, really firm. It makes a really light line. And then once I have things kind of the way I want them, you can sort of start to go over it a little bit more. Keeps it nice and light. I also just think this blue lead has kind of a nice, it's like welcoming. I feel like sometimes when you're drawing with a gray lead, to me it feels like muddy, and it feels not intimidating, but it feels like maybe once you've once you put it down, it's like you sort of committed to it. And sometimes if you're sketching, I just want to feel, I want things to feel like a little more loose, a little more open, and a little more just kind of like, hey, we're just having a good time over here. We don't have to worry too much about it. All right. So 3 kind of not dramatically different, but 3 distinctly different sketches, which really change, I think, the way you would end up inking these kinds of things. Also, if you are interested, this is kind of what it looks like when you add some extra details over top. Now this is a little tougher to remove in a digital environment. So if you're thinking about doing this kind of approach where you sketch out in blue and then you kind of start to refine in another color right on top, this is slightly more difficult to remove in the digital world because you're actually removing two levels of colors here instead of just one. But hey, that's up to you. If you want to experiment with that, go crazy. So that's kind of the idea. You just sort of build up around that, and some people like to sort of plan out the first phases and then go in from there. To me, this is like way too much drawing. I never do this. I would never do like 2 pencil drawings and then ink the drawing, and I already feel like inking is like too much work. It's already too many stages removed. But I do it because that's how I get things to look the way I want them to. I usually add shadows kind of a little bit in the inking phase. I know someone like Charles Burns or someone who's like really rigorous about making sure all the shadows are in the penciling phase. That's not really my bag, but if that's what you're into, that's what you're into. I certainly don't feel like anyone needs to rush what they're doing. You know, the nice thing about self-publishing and drawing comics for fun is you can really take your time with it, and no one's beating down your door for a deadline unless you have like a self-imposed like Patreon deadline or something. But even that, people are flexible on that. Speaking of Patreon, join our Patreon. It's awesome. We've been posting some artwork updates on there. Things are looking good. Many more things to come. We're kind of still building it up, but it's getting there. All right, cool. So let's do like 2 drawings and then ink them up. Let's do that. So two drawings, 2 very different energies here. I don't know if you can tell in the video how much I disliked drawing this one, but I don't know. That's just the way it goes. Again, one nice thing about drawing with this softer lead is, you saw me start the whole thing and then erase the whole thing, which is nice. If you start the whole thing with this blue lead, pretty tough to erase. So you can start kind of lighter, but again, I don't think it really matters to me, at least. Like, I kind of, all this pencil stuff's gonna go away anyway, so if you start really lightly, you can kind of just draw over it and draw right on top of it, and I think that's actually kind of nice. I have a really hard time personally drawing with these softer leads. I find the drawing always just turns out really sloppy. But I wanted to do this mainly so that I could ink them both with different tools. So this one I'm gonna use, I think, maybe I'll use the brush and like a G-nib, because those are a little more energetic. I have a little less control over those. And I think maybe this one I'll use the 102 pen, just to get a little more precision on it, because as you can see, this drawing much more precise, right? I was able to build up those lines with that lead. This one, once you put that lead down, it's pretty much there. You just got to kind of work with it, or you got to start over. So I personally prefer this sort of building approach, but this also maybe a little stiff. There's a give and take. I do kind of like the movement of this pose here. I guess I could theoretically ink them both with the same tool, and this could be one panel, this could be the next panel. But you know, there is an argument to be made that the more polished the pencil drawing is, the stiffer and less energetic the inking is, and maybe that comes through in this a little bit. But I find that if you try to ink, if you try to do a polished pencil drawing and then ink it really energetically, there's kind of like a disconnect to it. And if you try to do a loose pencil drawing and ink it in a really polished way, it just looks sloppy to me. Again, these are all just my my opinions. So let's ink these up and see how they look. Two very different approaches, one with the softer lead, looser sketches, one with the harder lead, more tight sketch, tighter inking. You know, just a personal preference. These are maybe not my favorite drawings in the world, but I think this gets the point across here. You know, the looser the sketches, maybe try to match that with the inking style. You know, whatever the energy is of the pencil drawing, that can be a nice way to try to match that with the way the ink comes through. Creates a little bit of synergy in how the drawing comes across. This blue line, again, you can dump out in your digital program. You just go into the color balance or the color sliders, drop out that blue, and then bump up the threshold. There's a few different ways to do it. Maybe I'll link to one in the description, but it's easy to find, easy to do. It takes about 2 seconds, and this is definitely my preferred way to go. The tighter building of the line and the tighter inking. But you know, experiment, get your own tools, give it a whirl, have fun with it, and I hope this was informative. Toodles.